Hi everyone, it's Emma Darcy from the Marketing Success Summit. I'm delighted to be back again today. Today is the very last day of the summit, and today I'm delighted to introduce you guys to Professor John Fahy. So welcome, John, and thank you so much for being a speaker on the summit.
Thanks very much, Emma. Delighted to be here.
It's great to have John. As I said, John is Professor John Fahy, so he's a lecturer in marketing. So obviously he is very well versed in the context of how to advise businesses, whether you be small, medium, or indeed corporate. John has written books on marketing and has taught all across the world in various universities, and is currently based in the University of Limerick, which is based in Ireland. So John, you know, from your background, academic background, because you're obviously researching all of this all the time, and you know, you're writing extensively on marketing and have been for obviously many years. What do you think is the kind of most common mistakes people tend to make in business when they're trying to approach their marketing?
Yeah, there are so many different kinds of mistakes that people make, Emma, but I guess one of the first one, probably one of the overall ones, I think certainly for new businesses, for businesses that are trying to get started, and it's very understandable, what they tend to put a lot of the focus on at the very early stages on trying to get sales, whatever kind of sale, as many as possible, as quickly as possible. And of course it looks great if your sales are starting to shoot up, but what we're cautioning there is, while that's really great and it helps you to get started and it helps to bring the revenue in and so on and so forth, what's really important for a company to be focusing on is who the customers are, what is it that really matters to them, and how well do I know them. And I think, to be fair, I think a lot of people who are starting enterprises are good at that, because they spend a lot of time with customers and they're talking to them and they're working with them and they're trying to understand them. Unfortunately, as businesses get bigger, that actually tends to become less of a central part of the way the business works. But what I'm saying there really is one of the big issues is really understanding the customers and really understanding what kind of value a company can provide to these customers that will help not only to get today's sale, but to get sales every day, and to get sales on a continuous basis, which is really what it is that you're looking for.
Some great advice, John. And just, have you any advice for people in terms of how they find out about their customers?
Yeah,
it's the biggest challenge for people.
Well, you see, one of the biggest challenges actually is that a lot of what we would teach and what an awful lot of companies do in terms of traditional market research techniques have been shown to be relatively ineffective. So what I mean by that is, if you look at some of the really successful brands throughout the world, brands like Red Bull, Bailey's Irish Cream, Sony Walkman, all of these types of brands over the generations, a lot of the research for these brands actually indicated initially that the brands were very, very likely to fail. So yeah, and these are multi-billion-dollar global brands now. So what that tells us is that finding out what customers want is actually really difficult. And this doesn't matter whether your customer is, you and me as going into the supermarket, or whether, you're selling computer components to a large multinational business. It doesn't matter who your customer is. Understanding them is difficult, and understanding them takes time. So I think what you've got to do as an entrepreneur or as a small company is make sure you invest a substantial portion of your time visiting customers, interacting with customers, observing customers, collecting information about customers, reflecting on the information that you collect about customers, spending time in your management teams discussing customers. And this is probably the one that, more than anything, you see an unbelievable absence of. So I've spent many years in many different boardrooms of many different companies, usually in a kind of a consultative role, or in sometimes perhaps in a mentorship role. And I just sit there and I watch what's being discussed at the management meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And customers only ever appear on the horizon if somebody wants to give out about them, which is really ironic, because these are the people who are keeping you in business, and they only ever get discussed, in that context. And this is where the problem is, because while we're really keen to spend loads of time talking about our HR issues, or talking about our operations issues, or talking about our quality levels, or talking about our compliance levels, and of course we spend hours and hours poring over the financial numbers from the last month, we spend no time talking about the group that actually sustained the business. And that's the problem.
That's actually, music to my ears, because it's something that I tell people all the time, but it's definitely, it's great to hear yourself saying it, John, because I feel like sometimes people don't believe me. And like you're saying, that, and of course you need to.
So part of the reason, Emma, is it's messy and it's difficult.
Yes, yeah.
And that's why it's much easier to look at a balance sheet. It's much easier to look at an income statement and have a great conversation about that. It's much more difficult to talk about what is it that our customers really want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we take all sorts of shortcuts, and we go, oh well, they just want cheapest price as possible, as much as possible for nothing. That's just lazy. It's just lazy thinking, and it's well, okay, if that really is what they want, then should they be your customer? Now that's a much more interesting conversation. Yeah. But of course, we have to have them as our customer because we're selling to them. Well, yeah, but they actually isn't making any money. You see, and again, the biggest problem for most startup stroke small businesses is, yes, they can get sales, but no, they can't make money. So there are very, very few businesses who failed because they couldn't get sales. They all could get sales. Some very, very big businesses. I mean, there are billion-dollar businesses who can't make money. This is something we need to remember. I mean, you may well be familiar with Groupon, for example, right? Well, Groupon went public in 2011. I think it generated sales of over $1 billion in 2012. It continues to generate $1 billion worth of revenue every year. It still hasn't made any money. Right? So now that's where the conversation should be. So when we're talking, so let's come right back down to, a one-person, two-person business. So, okay, so if I've got a customer that's really annoying me and bleeding me dry, have I ever looked at the profitability of that customer? Mm-hmm. Maybe it's time to fire that customer. Maybe it's time to focus on the lower levels of sales that I can actually make money from. And if there's one thing that companies should start focusing on, I think it's that, because sales are not what this is all about. Profitability, so how I define marketing is the provision of value to customers at a profit. So the two big things that marketers have got to be thinking about is, what value am I providing, and can I do it at a profit? Anybody can get sales.
I like it. That's an interesting twist, actually, to how people are looking at it, because as you say, it's kind of the rush to the front, isn't it, with sales? But,
well, of course. Well, look, it's totally understandable, because nobody gets into business to not see money coming in.
True. Well, that is true.
Of course, you want to see and nothing is more satisfying than looking at this year's revenue numbers versus last year's revenue numbers and going, hey, they went up 50%. We must be doing something right. And in many cases you might well be, but are you making money? Mm-hmm. That's a different question. And are you making money in a way that's, at least to some, nothing is sustainable anymore, but to some extent I am, so my big question whenever I'm in a business, and I think this also is a very useful thing for all businesses to think about, and it's amazing how difficult it is for people to answer this question, is how are you different and better than your competitors? How are you different and better? And if you can answer that, and I mean, and my criteria is you got to answer that in one sentence. I don't want to hear a paragraph. I don't want to hear a wishy-washy, let's talk about a lot of different things. Give it to me in one sentence, one really clear sentence, how I'm different and better. Now, that's what I mean by value. So in other words, if I can tell you straight away why I'm different and better, well, then I'm providing a kind of value that nobody else can provide, or nobody else is providing at the moment. I can do that. Not only will I generate sales, but I'm more than likely to generate profitability as well, if it is, if I've thought about it properly. And again, for me, the proof of this is in all the really great companies around the world. I mean, the great companies, there is very little ambiguity as to how they are different and better. I mean, like in our own case here in Ireland, we look at Ryanair, which went from the verge of bankruptcy in 1991 to the second biggest airline in Europe in terms of passenger numbers, and comfortably, and here's the interesting thing, this is a low fares airline that is comfortably the most profitable airline in Europe. Mm-hmm. We all know, and they know, and everybody knows how this company are different and better than their competitors, because they've been telling us for 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, John. And actually, just going back to your boardroom, or your examples of the boardroom, where they're talking, you're sitting there, albeit smaller but medium business owners, and they're, the conversation is about obviously finance and all the rest of it, and you're asking them about customers. What's the typical response when you're asking them the hard questions, the messy questions?
It's a great conversation stopper, Emma. It is. I mean, the conversation just stops.
Yeah.
And it quite shocked me actually when I, for the first few times that I did it, when you went into a management meeting like that, and you kind of asked a simple question like, well, what's your share of the market?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there's silence, and you're thinking, gee, I would have thought that was kind of something that most people would like to know.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, it doesn't tend to get you very far.
No. And we'll say, just for people listening as well, have you any advice for them? Because a lot of them are, it's coming towards the end of the year. For a lot of people listening in, Black Friday would have been a big day, and Cyber Monday. Personally, I've had one client come back, I think they made 11 grand in one day on
Right.
Black Friday. And I mean, that's all great, and running up to Christmas and whatnot. But I suppose for the new year, then people are starting to think, okay, well, what am I going to do for 2017? So have you any advice for people in terms of, how they can map out what they should be looking at ideally in 2017?
Yeah, look, I think it's to address a lot of the questions that we just spoke about there. And I mean, to go back to your Black Friday example, I mean, like one of the big problems we have in this business, one of the big problems we've always had in this business is how things become fashionable very quickly, and how everybody chases after a particular fashion, and then after a few years they realize actually that really wasn't such a good idea. And then the current one is digital marketing, for example, because yes, there are some very valuable elements to digital marketing, but to think or to claim or to believe that it might be some kind of easy ticket to success is just getting it all wrong. And increasingly so. And it's increasingly being proven, even at the level of the biggest companies who have invested heavily in digital are now starting to kind of really ask the hard questions, such as, okay, so maybe I'm getting some engagement, although the numbers are pretty poor. But does that engagement actually generate any sales? And ultimately, does it generate any profitable sales? So yes, okay, it's great to see somebody getting 11 grand in revenues on Black Friday, and hopefully there were profitable revenues. So what I would be saying really, and the kind of short answer to that question is, in terms of mapping out what to do in 2017, I think address those questions. I mean, address the questions of, do we really know our customers well? Do we really know what value we're providing to them? Do we really know how we're different and better? Do we know which are the kind of profitable customer groups that we should be focusing on? And who are the customers we should be firing? And I mean, to spend a bit of time properly examining those types of questions, I think would be a much more kind of strategic way of thinking about what you're going to be doing for 2017. And I think, at year end or at year's beginning is often a good time to do that kind of strategic style thinking, because I think we do it as individuals, as humans. I think we all kind of turn into a new year with our kind of goals for the year, or our objectives for the year, or our kind of targets for the year. So to think about the business in the same fashion actually might be a very, very good thing to do over the winter, over the December month and days.
Great. And just in terms of, you brought up digital there, and I know you teach on the master's program about digital, and as you rightly say, there's a lot of talk, and I see this myself, around like engagement, and I've got 1,000 likes on a post and all the rest of it, and of course that is good. However, as you rightly say, what's the next step? Like, what's conversion into sales, and as you say, profitability? And what's it actually doing for people? Because for many businesses, particularly I think small businesses, is they often can have posts on social media, whatever the platform might be, that are going viral in inverted commas, and they're delighted. However, that kind of subsides about a week or two later when they realise in their bank account it's not realising the benefit perhaps, and it's kind of like there's a missing link sometimes.
There's a massive missing link.
Yeah, for sure.
there's a massive ROI question that you've got to ask yourself there. So before, and as you rightly say, that we all know it now because we've reached that point where there is such a volume of noise out there that the lifespan of, not like the lifespan of your tweet is a matter of 20 seconds or less, and it's never seen by anybody again. The lifespan of your blog is very, very short. So the lifespan of all of this social media activity is really, really short. So therefore, you've got to, again, and this is where I would keep coming back to the bigger picture in all of this. If you're going to do this, and if you're going to invest the time in doing this, and that's the really important thing. So it's free, if you like, to post all of this stuff, but the cost is the time that goes into doing this. And if you're going to invest that time, you've got to commit to doing it consistently, and you've got to ensure, obviously, then that there is some return coming for this consistent investment that you're making. And if you can't, again, prove that, or certainly show that that's the case, well, perhaps your time is better invested elsewhere. Perhaps your time is better invested doing some of the kind of things that we might consider to be, more traditional. Actually, just getting out there and spending a half an hour with a customer might have been a far better use of that half hour than actually sitting down trying to think of yet another blog post. Yeah,
that's so true. And actually, one example, I don't know if I was saying this to you the last time I met you, John, but there's a lady I know in the UK, and she used lumpy mail, which effectively was sending out a letter, nice paper, headed paper, and chocolates, no less, with them. And she's a solicitor in London, and she made £150,000 worth of business last summer just gone from sending out letters, because it's kind of gone, to me, it's starting to come back a small bit, because you're getting so many emails. I mean, we're all the same, we're just bombarded, so sometimes we just don't even open them, to be honest with it. So how can you be different,
well, exactly, and that I suppose is, that is one of the great marketing challenges, is to find new and creative ways of doing things that cut through this unbelievable volume of noise that's out there, because we're all busy people. So the chances that we will attend to much, I mean, all of the stats would tell you that, and all of the kind of brain research would tell you that. I mean, as humans, we have great storage capacity. We can go back into our minds and retrieve memories from 30 years ago quite easily. But the key, and of course this is also the key in the classroom, is our attentive capacity is very, very low. So our ability to attend. So this notion that either men or women are brilliant multitaskers, we need to abandon all of that, because the science tells us we cannot multitask. We can just about attend to one thing at a time. So therefore, our ability to attend to all of this marketing noise that's happening around us, we're missing 99.9% of all of that. And again, so therefore, as marketers, we need to really ask ourselves, because we have all the technology. I mean, I don't know if you've used Hootsuite, for example. I mean, you can sit down there for 2 hours on a Monday morning. You can generate all your social media activity, and you can schedule it all to be pumped out for you over the course of the week. Great. But of course, you and thousands and thousands of other people are doing that. So we have this massive cacophony of noise that is just washing over people.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose it's about being heard. But I suppose what I'd like as well is, if you would mind, John, if you could touch on, because just with the summit is, like I've got a couple of people to talk about PR. Like we've covered digital PR because it's kind of slightly different, and also traditional PR. And also I had a lady on, or she's on at 1 o'clock today, talking about networking, and just kind of how to leverage. So kind of looking at some of the more traditional routes to market, because I just want to bring it back into people's mindset that like kind of a more integrated marketing campaign, as opposed to like there's just such a focus on social media that they're kind of, some people are missing a trick, or that's what I feel anyway. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Oh, I think my thoughts on that, first and foremost, Emma, is probably one of the biggest fallacies that is doing the rounds in marketing at the moment is traditional versus digital. And that's been going on now for probably 5 years at least, if not longer. And it will last maybe another 1 or 2. And then we'll realize that we shouldn't have been talking about traditional versus digital at all, because, and I think, and to be fair, lots and lots of marketers and companies have got this already. It's both. Yeah, it's neither one nor the other. It's both. And essentially what they all are routes for you to communicate with your customers and interact with your customers. And you as a marketer has to, looking at whatever your particular customer group is, decide which are the best routes, channels, whatever you want to call them, to communicate and interact with your customers. And if they're digital, that's fine. If they're non-digital, that's absolutely fine too. And the idea that, and you really do tend to get it, I think, with, because obviously, the people behind the Facebook and Pinterest and all these types of medium will of course want to say that all that other stuff is dead, because
it's in their interest.
That's exactly what they want everybody to believe in. But what we see, of course, is your cost per 1,000 impressions or your sales per 1,000 impressions on traditional media. Well, whatever about the cost, I think particularly the actual accruing sales levels per 1,000 impressions, they will be a lot stronger on traditional media than on digital media. And therefore, we, again, as I say, for any individual marketer, this will be a function of, who are your customers? Where do they reside? What kinds of channels do they get their information from? And maybe some of them really only use digital channels anymore, but that's certainly not the case for everybody by any stretch.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I heard one lady one day, and I was at a conference, and a discussion came up, about live stream. And she was in the auto parts, like car auto parts industry. And so because of how popular, I guess, live stream has become, she was positing the idea that she would live stream. They were doing exhaust pipes, I think, particularly. And so she was going to live stream exhaust pipes. And I just thought, but your target market, like, so people buying exhaust pipes typically wouldn't be your type of person on digital. Like the odd person, younger person, but typically they wouldn't. So she was putting a massive amount of time and effort into this, and was really creative. I mean, they were setting up cameras, they were very busy. And I just thought, why? Like, why on earth? Like, who's going to watch that? That's genuinely interested and genuinely going to buy like exhaust pipe. Because you're looking at mechanics, you're looking at car dealerships, you're looking at, those types of customers. And realistically,
and a lot of those guys they're not looking at a screen right now.
Yeah.
Well, they might be looking at a screen that's the computer that is doing a lot of the work on the car for them, but that's about it.
Yeah.
But again, you see, this is the point, and this is a really important point, Emma, is that all of these channels and techniques are available to us. And yes, and you've said it there, yes, and you can be awfully busy, and there's an awful lot of marketers who are awfully busy. But, and the big but in all of this is, and it goes back to where we started this conversation this morning, where are the customers? And what actually matters to them? rather than to us. And and I think as marketers, we should, this is something that should come very naturally to us, is that we start everything we do, we start from the marketplace. The idea comes from outside in rather than from inside out the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just wondering as well, John, I know you're obviously teaching with the digital media and the traditional, like we'll say, at the moment, what's your, I suppose, impression of the marketplace in the context of digital? I know you're saying digital versus traditional, but do you think like there's a percentage difference that people should be potentially, and again, I know it goes back to your marketplace, but I'm just wondering your thoughts on, how integrated should a marketing plan be, or what should people be thinking? Should it be 40%, 60%, or, I know it's how long is a piece of string, but I'd like to get people to think, okay, well, they need to give this valid thought.
Oh yeah, look, I think there are, so don't get me wrong, there are a lot of positives in using digital channels, if you want to call them that, or digital techniques. They can be very cost effective. They're very measurable. We can see what's working and what's not working very, very quickly. We can change things in real time. So there are lots of reasons why it makes a lot of sense to continue experimenting, working with these types of channels. So I think, and I think equally, in a very general way, most consumers, even if they are, people who deal with exhaust pipes every day, are spending some of their time on digital channels as well as on traditional channels. So therefore, I think the key is really to look at them all as part of a mix, as I say, of ways of both communicating and interacting with your customers. So therefore, I think they should both feature in all marketing activities at this point in time. And I think when one is designing a campaign, I think that the two key things that I'm always challenging my students to do when they're working on digital projects of any description. Two key things are integration and creativity. That's what we're about. So, will what we're doing work across multiple platforms? That's the integration piece. And the creative piece is, have we come up with something that will actually give us a chance, and that's all. Give us a chance of being heard above this wall of noise that is the modern kind of consumer marketplace.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I remember because I did the masters obviously a couple of years ago, and I remember the level of creativity that went into some of the projects, and it made me really think actually just in terms of businesses, that sometimes that perhaps they need to put a little bit more thought, if they can, into being creative, like you're saying, because of that cacophony of noise. I think they say something like we see 3,000 is like 4,000 images or messages a day, and that we're just, as you say, filtering them out. But I guess the challenge is that level of creativity and how to do it.
And one of the paradoxical things, Emma, is that in this world of digital, we have become incredibly uncreative.
That's true, actually.
We have, and this is the interesting bit. And actually, I see it when I task my people here with projects. What they do is they come back and they've spent 80% of the budget on Facebook ads.
Right.
And you're thinking, if I suggested to them that we spend 80% of the budget on TV ads, they just throw their hands up in the air and go, "You're a dinosaur," So, but what they've done is almost the same thing. You know what I mean? So, and this, I think, for all of your kind of listeners, the really important bit in all of this to remember is that it is very, very easy to spend money on marketing. It's very, very easy to put a lot of time and effort into marketing, but that's actually not what gets you the results. So it's not about the money, and it's not about the time and the effort. It's about how clever you are with using the resources that are available to you. It's not about throwing money at it. And I mean, I think, and this is the, excuse me, I think this is the mistake that so many people make, and it is part of the reason why marketing is, perceived by lots of people in business as just this part of the business that just spends money, and we can't ever see what the results are from it. And marketers are to an extent to blame for being unable to show how their efforts contribute to the success of the business. But it isn't about spending money, and obviously small businesses tend to have relatively little resource available to contribute to marketing. But what it's about is about understanding that, in order to get and keep customers, we've got to invest in them. And it's whatever level of investment that is, we've got to be very consistent about it. And I remember really taking to task a business friend of mine at a meeting recently where he was talking to me about a company, and he passed the remark that he says he was looking for somebody, a potential intern, for example, to work in this company. And then he passed the remark. Now, he says, this company needs a bit of help with marketing. Now, they don't need too much help for too long, but they need a bit of help with marketing. And I just couldn't believe what he said, because I just went, well, would you ever hear somebody saying, this company they just need a little bit of help with finance. They don't need it every year. They just need it for a few weeks. Or they don't need HR help every year. They just need it for a few weeks. But that's the way people think about marketing. It's kind of like, we just need to do a few weeks of marketing here, and then you can go away. I don't need to be spending time or effort with you anymore. And of course, that's ridiculous, because, it is an investment. And like any investment, you get out of it what you put in. And if it's not consistent, and if it's not well done, and if it's not carefully thought about, of course it won't get results.
For sure. That's a great example, actually, and I think that happens across the board, be it in small, medium, and corporate as well.
Absolutely.
And I think a part of it is because I think marketing is messy, as you said, and it's difficult to measure. And I suppose that's where digital comes in that with digital you can measure, or it's easier to measure. Yeah. Whereas people are harder to measure in the context of knowing the customer.
Of course, of course. But just because it's easy to measure, and then that's why so much money is being sucked into digital at the moment. But have you looked at the measurements?
Yes.
Have you looked at the results? And have you looked? And and when I say you, our marketer is looking at. Well, yes, of course, it's very, very easy to measure your results on, say, Facebook, for example. Have you looked at the click-through rates? Mm-hmm. We're talking 0.0 something percent. Yes. Okay, so of the number of people who potentially seen the ad, that's how many clicked through. Now, that's just clicked through. Yes. Now, how many of them have actually gone on and made a purchase based on what we're doing? So yes, it's much, much easier to measure. Is it getting his results? There's a big debate about that right now.
Yeah, it's funny because I know I introduced you to Christina Jones and their last year, or this year even, gosh, the years are flying by, but she's a digital marketer in the UK, and she talks a lot about that. And there's some great software out there, I think for e-commerce, they have hotjar.com, which basically will actually bring you through the journey of the customer. So at least I think people are starting to think, okay, not just that they come to the website, because they've shown 90% of people that come to the website go away and do nothing. Like, they've just come to it. So saying you have 100,000 hits a month might mean nothing. Yeah. So this actually tells you where they go, where they spend the time, and even, for example, if they go to the shopping cart, and the percentage of how many of them are actually going away from the shopping cart and not buying. And the question is, the messy question is obviously, well, why not? Is it, and there's a whole other science now around, well, is it the button? Is it the color of the button? Is it that you just didn't offer it well enough? But I think it's good in a way, because people are actually starting to think this whole process through, as opposed to what they were doing as the first few steps. So it's like, like dating analogies are often used in marketing, but it's like going for the date with stopping at the door and not actually walking into the cafe to meet them or something. They're not actually seeing the whole process through. But I'm just wondering as well, like, for people, have you any advice kind of in general? Because I know you've consulted with a lot of businesses, and I remember one actually that you did in class, put you on the spot now, John, but was it Bewley's, not Bewley's Cafe, the one on Grafton Street that shut down a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was Bewley's.
Yeah, and it was a really well-known cafe in Dublin, just for people that wouldn't know it. And it was there for, I think, was it 100 years, or it was there for a very long time. And people associated with going into it. It was very traditional when you went to Dublin, be it once a year or whatever the case is, to go to it. But in essence, it folded. And I'm just wondering, could you just give people a sense of, why that would be and there was actually a backlash, as I recall, in the media at the time, because people were, why? And, and yet, as you say, it wasn't profitable, but yet in the mind of the consumer, it was this cafe that was always going to be there, but yet they couldn't make it profitable. And it was on Grafton Street, for those that don't know as well, is like it's one of the best high streets in Ireland, so the footfall and whatnot shouldn't have been an issue.
Would be the best. But again, you see, it comes back to the to the point about customers, because as you rightly said, I mean, this is a very well-established, long, great history, great heritage business. And the day it closed, because customers were so aggrieved by its closing that they queued to get their last cup of tea or last cup of coffee at this cafe, and this queue snaked out the door and up the street, and the media picked up on the story and so on and so forth. But as a business person looking at this, what you're saying is, well, clearly we have a really strong customer franchise here. How come this business is folding? And of course it did ultimately, to kind of go back to some of the things we spoke about earlier in the conversation, it came back to profitability. People who were running this business were unable to run it profitably. Now, and of course, what I saw around a lot of the conversation, a lot of the discourse around that particular situation at the time was a lot of really lazy thinking. So this was at the height of the boom. And one of the things that happened at the height of the boom in Ireland was that high street rentals shot up. And of course, ultimately, it was rising rent costs that caused this business to fold. But so therefore, you had the protagonists behind the business kind of throwing their hands up and saying, well, look, we're great managers and we're running a great business, but the world is terrible and rents have risen and we can't make the business work anymore. Well, to me, that's just lazy, because there's two sides to this equation. There's revenues and there's costs. And it wasn't like we didn't see these, but I think when your rent is going to rise. I think just look at the contracts that you have in front of you. So what are you doing on the revenue side to deal with that cost rise that's coming down the track in 5 years' time or whatever? And of course, that's the problem. That's where the marketing comes really important again. So can we identify customer groups who would be willing to pay a premium so that our profitable revenues are rising, so that we can actually cover this cost base, this cost increase that's coming at us? And as you rightly said, and I mean, there was an even worse comment, Emma, and I've been meaning for many years to go back and try and find the original source, if I can, in the newspaper archives. But one of the managers was interviewed about this closure, and one of his comments was that it's extremely difficult to sell coffee on a busy street like Grafton Street. And I mean, with a straight face, probably. I mean, and you're just thinking, yeah. Anyway, so there again, I think what we saw was an inability to understand the market. You're in the very center of Dublin City. You have a huge variety of market segments, from business people to the tourists, but this company wasn't thinking segments. It wasn't thinking which are the profitable groups. It wasn't thinking about, well, what products and services will we need to put in place for a particular group of customers who might be willing to pay a premium. And here, of course, is the interesting bit. As you well know, if you happen to have a business meeting in a 5-star hotel within 100 yards of this particular place that closed, you could pay a multiple of what you were paying in Dewey's for a cup of coffee. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, hello.
Yeah. Do you know what actually strikes me, John, is, and I see this as well, and I don't know what you would think of this, but is it a case that sometimes people are too, they're not thinking like kind of medium term and long term? There's very much this short term kind of view. So there's the operational side of their business, and they're the coffees, and in this case, they're worried about that, but they're doing minimal to kind of, so they're looking at the numbers, they're ticking quite a few boxes, but they're not addressing the elephant in the room.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, Emma. But look, we are more short-term now than we've ever been, actually. And I mean, so start with publicly quoted companies. Their horizon isn't even 12 weeks anymore. Gosh. It's about 1 week.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you talk to people who work in publicly quoted companies, they have weekly sales numbers.
Gosh.
Okay? So, medium term? Well, look, somebody somewhere might pretend to be talking about the medium term, but most people who are doing stuff aren't even thinking about it beyond this week, next week, the week after. And of course, if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise, you have a lot of the same pressures on you because there's bills to pay. So, yeah, absolutely right. But again, I mean, you know, and you're right as well, I think, on the whole kind of operational side. And I mean, I talk a lot about this when I work with managers and I work with companies. And you know, what everybody will keep telling you is the reason for this is that all that operational type stuff is easier, it's less risky, you can see the results of your work much quicker. Your time horizons anyway as an individual within an organization is shorter and shorter because, you know, notions that we might be working with the same company for years and years and years have all disappeared. So everybody's time horizon has become shorter and shorter. And that makes, I think, those companies who can kind of pull back from all of that and actually structure themselves and organize themselves in ways whereby they can think about what they're doing in the horizon that isn't down to a matter of weeks, have a better chance, I think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it's actually interesting. I don't know if I was saying this to you the last day as well, John, but I was called in with the company was it last year, and they're pretty well known in Ireland in 3 big offices and quite a lot of staff and whatnot, and had no business going forward from the day that I met them. And had been on TV and, you know, like a well-established business, and sheepishly, you know, they just hadn't been doing any marketing. This is what the conversation was. And they knew what, you know, I mean, you know, they knew what they hadn't been doing. But, you know, of course, it's not going to turn around overnight. And of course, they've large wages. I mean, straight away, you can see the costs, the offices, the wage bills, you know,
absolutely
nothing coming, like literally nothing there. I think within a week, they were actually running out of projects. And it was actually going to be a bother to what were people going to be doing all day. But nothing right now. In fairness, they turned it around and all the rest of it. But I just was so shocked and interested at the same time to have that conversation with very bright people, very well educated. You know, it wasn't a case of somebody that, and I'm not disregarding people, you know, but sometimes there's the idea that if you haven't been trained and, you know, in business and whatnot, that you can't do this. But sometimes people are more proactive, you know, that they're just consistent and they're thinking ahead. And you don't need a business degree to do that. It's actually just organizational skills, really. But well, I'm just wondering your thoughts on that. Do you think like that's a common problem, or?
Yeah, I think it's a very common problem, but I think it goes back to the earlier conversation we were having about what to, you know, this is the responsibility, for me, this is the responsibility of the management team. I mean, these are the people who are charged with guiding the ship, if you like, while lots and lots of other people are busy propelling the ship forward. But as we said earlier, when you actually look at what people talk about at management meetings, it's not about this type of stuff. You know, and unfortunately and sadly, and that happens everywhere, this type of stuff that we're talking about now is usually set aside for the strategy away day. And
that's just gathering on from the previous day.
Absolutely. And there is usually a really good, well facilitated, interesting conversation that happens at the strategy away day, and then everybody goes back to their desks. And we have a somewhat similar conversation in a year's time. There's the problem. Right? So it needs to become a central responsibility for 2 or 3 or whatever number, depending on the size of the organization, key individuals at a senior level.
It's frightening, really. And actually, John, just to bring, you know, because you're taking up too much of your time, but you know, John, you've written obviously the Foundations of Marketing. You've written a number of books, and I still use my Foundations of Marketing.
Delighted to hear that, Emma.
I need to get the updated version.
There will be a new edition in 2017.
Oh, excellent! Because I was going to get the other one, so I'll hang on till 2017 then. But what I'd say to people, you know, with your book, The Foundations of Marketing, I highly recommend people get it. John Fahy. I presume you can get it on Amazon, can you? Or
sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
But what I'd say to people is, like, it's literally, there's so much there, like, and that's not to overwhelm people, but it's logical, common sense stuff, and you've lots of excellent case studies and how to apply what to do and what not. But I'm just wondering, from that book and having written that book, is there any kind of overarching advice you could have for people kind of as a parting comment, you know, about marketing and business? Because again, it's small to medium business owners. So a lot of this, you know, we're talking about management, it applies to the small business owner as well.
Yeah, I suppose, look, it's to come back to perhaps one of the questions that I mentioned earlier on, and maybe this also would help to understand why your company that you walked into there recently found themselves in the situation that they were in. And the question is, how are you different and better in the marketplace that you operate in? Because I think if you answer that question clearly and you continually try to evolve that answer to make it more and more compelling, you won't find yourself in the situation that your company found itself in. Because if you are providing a compelling level of value to customers won't stop coming to you, and you won't have to go out and try to find another sale, because the value that you're providing is such that customers are coming to you anyway. And I think that's, you know, that's ultimately, I mean, people who would have maybe studied marketing years and years ago might have come across a definition of marketing that was around making sales easier or facilitating sales, but actually that's the job. But how that happens is the tricky bit, and the bit that maybe was less well understood. But how that happens is about, as I keep repeating, it's about understanding, you know, the differential value that we're providing. And that's, I think, the question that is worthy of any executive's time or any manager's time or any entrepreneur's time. I mean, what am I doing that's different and better, that's separating me from all of that other crowd that are out there? And, you know, you talk about examples. I mean, look at the way a company like Dyson might have come into what was a traditional, mature industry and changed it by a revolutionary focus on design. Mm-hmm. You know, and they are wonderful at the you know, and this was James Dyson's ability. Was he was a terrific designer, and he was able to create really, really interesting products. Now, in consumer marketing, it is very rarely about that, but in his case, he was able to change the way the technology worked to separate his business from all of the other players that were out there. I mean, for a lot of consumer marketers, it's just about changing the way people think about things. Mm-hmm. I mean, go back to our example of Red Bull. As I said, all the initial market research told the entrepreneur in this business that he should just abandon this project because this is never going to work. But these guys understood that it wasn't about selling an energy drink. It was actually about selling something really intangible, like a sense of adventure. Yeah. So that's what's made them different. And Red Bull owns adventure. I mean, you just look at that brand. What does it associate itself with? You know, Formula One racing, you know, downhill skiing, cliff diving, parachuting in from outer space. I mean, they own that emotion, that sense of adventure. So that's what every business has to figure out for itself. Like, what tiny little space does it own? And you need to own it.
Great, that's fantastic. I'm writing these down myself to remind myself later, John. No, that's fantastic advice, and thank you for that, because I think as a parting comment, I think, you know, our advice, that is really the core of what will make their businesses work. You know, it just all comes from that. And I think some of the examples you're giving, like Red Bull, we can all identify. I mean, straight away in my head, I'm ticking off, you know, like all those that I associate with them. And, you know, it's everyone will be able to do the same.
And I think this is really important to say, Anna. But do remember, in 1987, Red Bull was a startup, just like an awful lot of your clients.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody started at the beginning. Yeah. None of them parachuted in and started at $1 million a year. They all started at the beginning. Now, you know, it wasn't all one great, brilliant plan on this guy's part. He stumbled and fumbled like lots of people for years, and finally it clicked and it took off. But the point is, all of these businesses, no matter how big they are today, they were all startups at some point. Okay, but I think if you start to try to look at what was common about the ones that, because we are interested in the ones that really succeeded, because they are the ones where maybe we have the strongest lessons. And I think you put your finger on it. It is at the core. What is it that you are just better at than anybody else?
Great, fantastic. Well, John, I'd like to thank you very much. You've given some absolutely fantastic advice for people, and I know they can literally implement that today. You can start doing that today. It's not something to put off. So FYI, guys, if you're listening in, start doing it today. This is something you can start today, and as you say, to own the market that you're in, that people clearly identify with you, and that sets you apart, and that means people will gravitate towards you, and that translates into sales really at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
As opposed to being the same as everybody and doing all your social media and wrecking your head and spending time and spending money and maybe just not being heard in a sea of noise. So again, thank you, John. I really, really appreciate your time, because I know poor John is correcting lots of projects and exams and all the rest of it. So I really appreciate your time, John. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, Emma. Delighted to chat with you this morning, and just want to wish all your clients the very best in their efforts, and hopefully that's some help to them.
Great. Thanks so much, John.
My pleasure, Emma.